I like to cite the case, there was a man in Toronto who had developed a brand new technique for being able to diagnose a very rare phenomenon called focal epilepsy, and it involved flashing lights on the eyes and inducing an actual convulsion. And he applied then for a grant, a special grant from the Medical Research Council of Canada to use this technique as a diagnostic tool. And he was turned down because they said that there was no other lab anywhere in the world that was doing that. And of course the answer is obvious, that he had invented the technique. He then went and applied to the States and immediately got a huge grant from NIH, the National Institutes of Health. But again, it just made me very sad that we just don't have faith. And if you look at the banking industry in Canada, the banks don't put money on people. They put it on property. They invest it abroad, but they do not invest in Canadian talent. We don't believe in ourselves. So what I have been saying for years, and I've had a long-standing dialogue with Mr. Trudeau in which I've said, your government doesn't understand that for a relatively small investment in building a first-rate scientific community, without specifying what area, just build a first-rate basic science community. In a very short period of time, you would have role models for people of true international excellence. And he never understood that. Instead, what we get now is a lot of chest beating. We get a lot of government magazines and slick brochures proclaiming how great we are in science. What I, as a broadcaster, have done has been to try to push the notion that you have to have youngsters growing up in a climate where they know that there are world-class people in their own country, so that they can believe in themselves and believe that if they want to do something globally, they can do it in Canada. The current Tory government points to the private sector. That's a term that makes me sick every time I hear it. But the private sector is going to pull us out of the problem, and the private sector has got to invest more in science and technology. The problem is that the major companies in Canada that can invest in R&D and that can utilize the consequences of R&D are almost all multinational. And they simply don't want to invest in research and development in a colonized country. They want that to go back to the mother country. So we have an underlying problem of the fact that economically Canada is in control of its own economy and then can't look to its private sector to help it. Okay, so I look forward to the discussion.
My name is Ian Polmere, Monash University. First, may I say, sir, I thank you for perhaps the most enjoyable working morning I've had for years. But I wanted to comment on two things in Australia, one of which I think we've got wrong, and one of which I think we're now getting right. I happened to have just 2 weeks ago stepped down from being chairman of a department which we call materials engineering. Quite unknown when we started in 1970, but we felt that the materials game just must be a game in which we'll go ahead. You know, of course now, ceramics and all the rest of it, we've got money, the department's got money coming out its ears. But and what do we do with this money? We want to do research with people, as you say. And the academic staff are working very long hours, but they can't do it. So what do? We hire postdocs and research assistants and the like. Now, we can't get the postdocs and of very good quality overall. So we go for postgraduate students. And we've built up a lot of contacts overseas because you can't get them enough in Australia. And engineers can get 22,000 when they go out. Who's going to accept 7,000 to do a PhD per annum? So we built up these contacts overseas, and my own particular department, particularly with the People's Republic of China. And we've had superb Chinese wanting to come and work with us, and we've got a number there now. And I'm saying this really for Mr. Jones' benefit. So what does our government do? It charges all overseas postgraduates a visa fee. From the 1st of January 1987, they've got to pay $4,660, and they get a stipend of about 8 or 9. So suddenly the tap's just shut off. So that's one thing we've got wrong in a quite stupid way. And I hope Mr. Jones, who I'm sure is sympathetic to what I'm saying, may be able to persuade the senator concerned that really that was a silly decision. The other thing where I think we're getting it right in Australia, and I congratulate the Labor government on many initiatives, and I'm not a politically minded person. We have in Australia a very large organisation, CSIRO. They've done some very nice work indeed. And I recently was chairman of a review of material science in CSIRO. And just as an aside, it was so amusing, you're talking about bandwagons, that materials has suddenly become a buzzword. And when I was writing the report for this, I was ringing up Canberra every week and saying to the secretary, how many people in CSIRO say they're working in materials this week? It was going up exponentially. But that's beside the point. CSIRO has done some wonderful work, but they really were working many divisions in the basic area, fundamental area, the university area. And as I've often said to my colleagues over lunch, some of them are universities without students. And the federal government, and Mr Jones in particular, has been trying to move them, and I think successfully, to a more developmental stage. Leave the fundamental work to the universities, because we're not very good on D in Australia, the D factor, because industry doesn't do very much. In doing this, of course, we're moving a lot of people, very good people, clever people, out of the fundamental area in the CSIRO to take up and do some of the D work. So we're going to diminish our fundamental research. And I wonder what you think about this move, which I personally think is the right one. But what do you think?
Well, we've always looked at CSIRO. I've always held that up as an example of where government organizations can be world-class, can really support good people. And there was a period during which NRC flourished in that way. And I feel very proud of that, and I think there should be a good basic foundation in the government labs. But in Canada, NRC has, for 15 years, been under enormous pressure to be more interested in the applied. And I think that as long as you've got a good basic group there so that they can interface with the universities, and there is a lot of interaction, that the clear government indication they want applications coming out of this is having an effect. But I agree with you. I think that the government labs should be the area that are making that connection. But I believe that there should be a very strong basic component in that as well. The question is really how much. Now, to get back to the first comment you made, why was this tax imposed? There can't be so many of these that it's a big source of income for the government. Is it punitive? I went to school in the United States, and I went to a school which treasured its foreign students. They selectively brought in scholars from other countries. And certainly for me, mixing with people from different countries was an invaluable part of my education. Canadians tend to be very parochial. And I think having kids from Hong Kong and India and so on is an addition to Canada. And I've never understood why we feel that we should be taxing them when these foreign visitors are coming, adding something to the education of our people. Now, it has got to a point where they are a significant proportion of our student body. And I can understand that taxpayers are getting a little uptight about that. But we must never forget they add an enormous amount to an academic community.
I'm Jim Peacock from CSIRO. The lack of clout of political issues and connections for science, the Ministry of Science, that seems to me to be really at the centre of a lot of the inabilities of science to do more things for its country. The painting you applied for Canada holds in this country just spot on. And as in your country, our ministry is low down on the totem pole. I believe so anyway, and I don't want to embarrass Barry, but it's certainly not like some of the European countries where science is one of the major ministries. So how do we get at that? Most scientists are not good ones. There's only a few winners, and it's hard to pick them. Most politicians, if they try and back scientists, they're going to be embarrassed because almost all of their putative role models are going to go wrong. And their half-life is not the half-life of most events of science.
Right.
So there are a lot of worries.
Yes. Well, I agree, and I think that's an extremely important question. What I have seen over the years has been that scientists have, when they've been pressed with, budget cuts and so on, have immediately tried to educate or put pressure on the politicians. And so I remember once when cuts were administered to Medical Research Council of Canada, and scientists marched on Ottawa with signs saying Marc Lalonde, who was a minister, causes cancer. And they got an extra $2 million from him as a result. Now, I am absolutely appalled at this because I think it is possible that you can make short-term headway. But what has been overwhelming to me is that you barely get a minister to where he even understands, and he's gone. And it's a waste of time and effort to try to educate each one going on. So I have taken, since '62, the long-range program that says science will only be supported on some kind of long-term basis when the public takes science as importantly as being able to read and write and add one and one. So science has got to be a part of your culture. And you can't talk about being an educated person if you don't understand science and technology. Now, I feel very strongly the scientific community itself must be banged very heavily because they have always regarded the popularization of science as a vulgar activity of third-rate intellects. Now, they may be right in terms of me, but I don't think that gives them any excuse for not becoming involved. It doesn't justify their hands-off attitude.
Well, you've only given us two answers through your talk, I think, faith and kids. You're a unique person in that you've been a scientist and you're a broadcaster who can influence a lot of people. Have you seen any measurable increase in
I knew you'd ask the embarrassing
science
question.
and culture?
Well, what has happened as a result of my involvement in science has been something totally unexpected. There has been a very strong effect of my activity. And it was one that was completely unexpected, and that is that it made me a star. Now, I never went into television to become a star. I hate that part of it. But I have become recognized, and because I'm sure Robin Williams has the same thing, because of that, I have people, for some reason or other, trust me. Maybe my eyes or something. They can't see it. So. But that means I have a lot of clout. Well, I don't like that, because I never wanted them to say, you know, according to Chairman Suzuki, we should be doing this, therefore, that is really demagoguery. But in terms of their real comprehension and understanding of the issues, there hasn't been much effect. That's why I'm now putting more and more of my effort in the earlier years, and I'm really trying to hammer it at ministries of education. And that's very difficult in Canada because education is a provincial affair. But trying to get ministries of education to put much more emphasis in the early primary years and stop this stuff of university and high school pouring stuff in there. It's too late. We have to keep people plugged in at the early primary level. Well, that's very long-term stuff. Meanwhile, governments are running away and making decisions that are having enormous impacts on the scientific community. And essentially, I've said for me, it's not a priority. Guys like you who are up in high administrative positions are going to have to fight those out. But you're going to have a tough time. You're going to have to re-educate every new guy that comes up.
Just may I put in my own defence say this.
No one's attacking you.
No, but I think there is a striking contrast in some ways between the Canadian situation and our own. First of all, MOST, as you said, has a very tiny budget and is really essentially an information or coordinating group. Science is midway in the position of the government departments in terms of budget, and in terms of the number of personnel involved. Of course, we're very much bigger than MOST.
Does medicine fall in your...
No, that's under health. The National Health and Medical Research Council comes under the Ministry of Health, and there's a separate science operation within Defence. But the other thing I wanted to correct is that Jim Peacock is not correct in saying that in Europe, in many cases, you've got ministries of science with higher levels of clout. That's simply not correct. In Britain, for example, science is just a tail-end Charlie to the Department of Education. And you may be interested to know that the Sherfield report, which has just been produced by the House of Lords, actually points to Australia and says they're the ones, they know how to do it, they're the ones to get high priority for science, and that's the model that we ought to be following. You see, in France, the position of Minister for Science has been abolished under the Chirac government. In the United States, the assets of the Office of the Presidential Advisor, there's no Cabinet Secretary, has been halved. Sweden doesn't have a Minister for Science. Italy does have one, but he's right down the bottom of the pecking order. The portfolio, I must say, that I rather like the sound of is in Belgium, where they have a combined portfolio of finance and research. That sounds to me, I'm working on that, that sounds to me like a very attractive combination. Japan has an operation, their ministry is very much like the Canadian ministry. It's a very small advisory thing, really lacking any clout. So, relatively speaking, I think we're not doing too badly.
I'm Paul Thewlis from the Community Interest Computer Consultancy. The group that I work for is a non-profit organisation set up to look at the social impacts of information technology. For me, what you've outlined today is that science and technology is very deeply embedded in the political process. And it seems to me that you're arguing to some extent that scientists ought to be able to keep their independence from the private sector and various other interest groups so that they are able to make an independent comment, judgment, etc. And the other thing that was interesting for you to say was that scientists speak both scientific language and the language of the everyday man. The sort of comments that you tend to get from a lot of academics, or I hear from a lot of academics, is the one that was expressed just over here a few minutes ago, that I'm not a political man. I do my job, I'm good at being a scientist. I'd say that there is a certain skill in being able to, which you would appreciate, in being able to communicate to the everyday man about science and technology. So, I'd argue that there is as a sort of another role in there, an intermediary role, which in very much you're playing in to some extent Canada, is that there is a role for groups who are looking at the holistic side of things, who are able to look at the social impacts of it and allow, to some extent, the scientists to go and do their work, but put the pressure on the politicians, on the political environment, which then dictate the culture under which the science and technology is developing, directing away from a sort of military approach into sort of social benefit. So what I'd be interested in is your sort of reaction to the idea of basically what I argue is government support for groups to look at the holistic approach, but also as to what level of work's being done in Canada in that sort of area.
We have a lot of groups that are very effective, in fact, in putting pressure on government. These are private groups like Pollution Probe, which has been extremely effective in dealing with acid rain. Then there's also the Acid Rain Coalition, which is an umbrella organization. There are lots of groups that spring up around... What did I say? Oh. I didn't say that deliberately. There are a lot of groups that spring up over specific issues. When there's a PCB spill, there'll invariably be a PCB citizens group or something like that. And their effectiveness varies from organization to organization. What I find is that the minute they become dependent on government for money, they lose a lot of effectiveness, because really whoever pays, calls the shots. And so if they can depend for their support and help on volunteers, on people paid by donations and so on, they're in far better shape. But there's a strong anti-nuclear lobby, for example, and it's really kind of a David-Goliath situation. Canada is so heavily committed to the CANDU reactor, for which it has spent billions of dollars now, that we can't pull ourselves out. This is one of the problems with these technologies, is they're kind of like black holes. Once you make your investment, you've got so much in them, you can't just walk away from it. You have to keep going and subsidizing them. So AECL, the Canadian government organization, puts out well over $2 million a year in PR for nuclear energy. It's very hard for a small citizens group to fight against that kind of stuff. The fact is that built into our society are some very basic assumptions about what our society's priorities are. Jobs and the economy dominate everything else. And when it comes to an issue like computers or public privacy in the electronic age, or the impact of in vitro fertilization or something like that, the bottom line usually that society and politicians respond to is jobs and whether it brings money into the economy.
Ron Wells, for 20 years a member of scientific staff of the University of Melbourne, and for the last 2 years a member of the Victorian Parliament. David, I agree with your basic thesis that in the long-term viewpoint we need to have our whole community better informed about matters scientific and technological. And I take your point that the half-life of many parliamentarians is a bit short in terms of the sorts of things that you and I would support, but not for all parliamentarians. I would think that Barry Jones would agree with me that there's another aspect to this general problem that we have to face up to in our parliaments and party rooms, and that is that ideas may be put forward by individuals who must themselves in the beginning, of course, be informed to be able to propose the matters, but then nearly always they are voted upon by the rank and file of the parliamentary party. And it's from the party room that the matter will then proceed to the parliament from one side or the other, no matter where it originates from. So it seems to me that we really have to face the fact in the shorter term that because money is controlled, so much of taxpayers' money is important in scientific work, and it is controlled through parliaments. Although we must continue to run our publicity campaigns in the community for educational purposes, if nothing else, we nevertheless have to face what may be an unpalatable fact, I think, which is that we must also zero in much more efficiently on our members of parliament than we do. In the last 2 years, I've been exposed on many occasions to just such exercises from all sorts of areas of the community. Come and see us and see what we're doing and talk to us about our ideas. I get almost nothing of that from the academic community. And I think that members of this audience today really must see how they can give more attention to seeing that the members of Parliament are informed better about the things of interest to the people. Some of them will continue there on a longer term basis. It's difficult because the subjects we're interested in are ones that don't have a direct cost-benefit analysis in the short term that you can precisely measure. When the cards are on the table and cash is short, we want those members of Parliament to have a sufficient background to be able to say we cannot afford to cut that area because that's the sort of area that to our total community in the long run cannot be discarded. Can you give us any lead from Canada as to what you're doing there to get your parliamentarians better informed?
Well, first of all, I should say, Jim, what he's done is given you obviously what you're saying is we have to have a two-pronged approach. There have to be those that are looking towards really the long-term commitment in terms of social awareness of science, and then there has to be, of necessity, the political reality is that we have to keep informing our elected representatives. And I've been very uninterested in the latter simply because I have met all of the ministers as they've come up, and I've seen them just turning over. And I don't deny that that's an important part, is to educate them. But there have to be other groups to do that. And there are a number of organizations in Canada that are again, umbrella organizations for this biology society, the genetics society, and so on. And they kick in a certain amount. And they try to essentially, I don't know whether you'd call it lobby, but they try to get their cause constantly before the MPs in Ottawa. I'm not sure how successful they are. Certainly the, what are they called, technicians for medical research or something, is very effective. Anything having to do with health, I find, is very, very effective. People are worried about that, and they can make inroads. In terms of the physical sciences, it's much more difficult. And I'm not sure how effective they are. But I agree with you. I think that's what you have to do.
Roger Banks from Telecom Australia. Dr. Suzuki, you've mentioned, and I think it's very compelling, that if we're going to make an impact in this area to advance your thesis, which I think finds very little argument in this room, we need to get to work on our young people, on our children in the education process. I'd be interested in what steps have been taken in Canada to achieve this, recognising that whenever this question of putting more politics, philosophy and economics into the science curriculum is mentioned, or vice versa, both sides of the railway tracks, if you will, say we've already got too much pressure in our own area of specialty. You know, we really can't afford any time for our budding scientists to spend time discussing the philosophy and logic, because we're having to cram the scientific curriculum more and more with the new techniques. I'd be interested in what's been achieved in Canada in
First of all, you should understand, I've given you my ideas as one person, as a scientist broadcaster. I don't come representing any government group or anything like that. I have sat on the Science Council of Canada for 6 years. This is the one headed by Stuart Smith. And one of the most important things I was involved with in that 6 years was a 3-year study of science education in Canada. Now, in Canada, education is a provincial affair, and each province hangs on to that jealously, and they don't want anybody infringing on their turf. And amazingly, every Minister of Education welcomed us to come in, even though we were feds. We're coming in from the federal government. So that was an indication they knew that something was wrong. Well, the report that we finally submitted was an incredible indictment of the role of science in the schools. What we showed in the grade schools was that 90% of the teachers in grade school and primary school are women, that on average they had been out of university for over 10 years, that while they were at university they had virtually no science in their background at all. And then we went through and documented the availability of lab time, equipment, and so on. There was virtually nothing in the primary schools, and in the high schools it was better, but marginally better. So the recommendation was that we embark on a program to try to assure 1 hour of science every day of every school child's life, academic life, so that every day from grade school on, they would get at least 1 hour of science. And then it very clearly outlined how to get to this objective. I was astonished at how little it would cost, of the order of $5 or $6 per person per year. And we felt that it could be reached within 5 to 6 years. That report, we're a long way from realizing it, has had an enormous impact. The most tangible one in British Columbia has been that they upped the science requirement of all students from grade 10 to grade 11. And they created a new course in grade 11. I won't go into the nuts and bolts. My own feeling is that we're missing the boat. There's a tremendous amount of interest in the deficiency of women in science and engineering, for example, so that the governments are putting a lot of money into recruiting women, and millions of dollars at the university level, and a lot of money into the high school level to promote role models and make films and tell girls of all the opportunity. My own feeling is that's a total waste of time and money. Not total. It is a waste of money. Because my experience, and I say this as a father of 4 girls, is that those kids are being turned off long before they get to high school. Because of the social attitudes that are rampant throughout our society, girls are simply not expected to go into engineering or math or science. And so we're losing them too early. My advice is our education ministries tend to look on the early years of primary school as babysitting, so that we put a disproportionate amount of money into the last years of primary school, much more into high school, and much more into universities. And I think that the increase in money for science in education should be being dumped into kindergarten in the first few years, because it's my belief, and I say this more as a parent than any kind of social scientist, those are the critical years when we lose the kids, or we get them in, so that they keep an interest in science. We're turning them off very, very early. And so my suggestion is put your emphasis in the primary schools. What has happened in Canada is an enormous con job as far as I'm concerned, and that is we're spending millions of dollars trying to get computers into elementary schools. Parents are scared stiff of computers. They realize that their children may have a high chance of needing computers in the future, and they want their kids to be computer literate. So, for example, the province of Ontario is spending millions of dollars trying to get every school teacher in Ontario computer literate. It's costing a huge amount of money. Total waste of time as far as I'm concerned. I think computers are the biggest swizz going as far as education is concerned. Last thing we need in elementary school are computers. But that's a whole nother speech.
If I just comment on a couple of things as we conclude. I've come across a couple of examples. I mean, this is all sort of anecdotal and impressionistic, but in the last few weeks, really, of people who have, in one case, finished secondary education and have done very well in the sciences, who say, right, well, I've done that, I've finished, now I want to enjoy myself in life, and I want to do something else, a bit more worthwhile. And one case, actually, I must say, my niece, who just finished a first-class honours degree at Melbourne University, and says, that's it, never want to do it again, never want to look at another test tube, and wants to go in a completely different direction. Very embarrassing for the Minister for Science, but there you are, you see. But that's not counting the people who are turned off at kinder and so on. I must confess to being profoundly sceptical about the computer role in school. There was a survey carried out by the Victorian Department of Education some years ago, where a couple of public servants went round a couple of educators went round looking at the world situation. I think they found that the country that had the smallest number of computers in schools was Sweden. I think the country with the largest proportion was, I've forgotten whether it was the Chad Republic or the Mali Republic. It was one, because it was felt that there was a totemistic significance. If you had it in the classroom, well, everything was going to be all right. And in fact, the problem is that you've got a deep division within the education department of teachers who are computer-philes and those who are computer-phobes. And I think the argument would be to say, well, if you said our lives are increasingly dependent and shaped by the internal combustion engine, if you only bring an internal combustion engine into every classroom, suddenly a lot of mysteries will be opened up. I think that's very dubious too. But you might say that, that courses in map reading or navigation and so on might be very useful. You don't really need the engine in there to do it. But it's been a very good morning. I'm very grateful to David for having come out. So thank you very much, and I'd like you to join me in congratulating him.